Hello and welcome back to another of our podcast episodes, Compelling Conversations. I'm your host, Steve Ramerini. I also am the founder and chief visionary officer of Compel CEOs. And it is a privilege today to have someone with us who's a great friend to Compel, Christophe Morin, Dr. Christophe Morin. Christophe has been known to me now for a little over 20 years. He's been a friend of Compel since the beginning when we started. And a little bit about his background. He has spent well over 25 years researching primarily two topics. One, which we're going to spend some time on, is neuroscience, and the other we'll spend a little bit of time on later on, is on mental health, which is something that's very near and dear to his heart. But during the course of that time, he has made countless presentations around the world on the topic of neuroscience. And he's actually written or co-authored 8 books, the first of which was actually translated into 14 different languages and sold into 30 companies. And it was entitled Neuroscience. And he's written other books since then. And his latest book is Neuroscience and AI, which you can see behind us. And he's going to be touching upon that. And we're very fortunate. This week, he's in from Hawaii, where he lives, to talk at our annual summit. So, Christophe, it's a pleasure to have you. And I also want to mention that he is so well recognized in the world for his expertise in neuroscience. He is also a faculty member at Johns Hopkins University. So he's written 5 books on neuroscience and 3 on mental health. As I said, we'll get into that. And so welcome. It's a pleasure to have you.
It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Great.
Steve.
Thank you. Thank you. So if you could tell the audience a little bit, describe your journey, how you got to where you are today, where you started out and where you're at.
Well, my journey started in France, where I was born. And as a young child, I was absolutely fascinated by what my father was building, which was primarily trucks that would convert into shops on French markets. And I thought it was fascinating. Why? Because he was really building these shops so that they could be set up literally in minutes for those traveler, companies that were at the time not fully like we imagine retail today, but engaging with customers in markets. And I would be around him very young, watching what people are noticing, what people are buying. At what point do they report having a good shopping experience? At what point do they report not having a good shopping experience? And I believed that was just the first opportunity for me to understand and become very aware that you can have the best product on the planet if the shoppers do not have a good experience, if the psychology behind what they believe they've engaged with is not following a particular model, you're going to struggle. And in fact, I did watch my own father create a lot of amazing products, but many would fail because he was just not trained to learn the science of consumer behavior, the science of marketing. So I pursued an MBA. This was my first time to come to the United States in the early 80s. Came back and rushed back, hoping to take over my dad's business, but he went belly up.
Oh.
And I was just too late, which was crushing because I really loved his business. It was a pretty large business, almost 1,000 employees, but he just didn't have the training, and I believed at the time the education to manage the business. So since I could not be of help to his business, I decided at 26 years of age to come back to the United States and did my entire business and education career in the United States. Since then, I was first a CEO of a French-owned company making flags and traffic control equipment. And it was a very humbling school as a young CEO. This is how I met a company called Vistage, at the time called Tech, and it's through Tech, as you know, that we got to know each other.
Yes.
After doing my corporate gigs for about 15 years, I was really quite eager to start my own company. So in 2002, with another gentleman that you know, Patrick Renvoise, who is the co-author of many of the books that we wrote together, we started this company looking at the neuroscience of marketing. We both had been highly paid executives in all kinds of companies, either as CEO or chief marketing officer, and we recognized that marketing as we knew it was broken. There was too much attention to what people said and not enough attention to what was happening in their brain. And so in 2002, I came up with a pretty radical idea, which was, what if instead of just talking to people and doing surveys and focus group, what if I could, in fact, safely and ethically figure out whatever emotions they're having in their brain? So I became fascinated by neuroscience, decided to go back to school and get my PhD in media psychology with a concentration in neuropsychology so that I could competently and, shall we say, safely conduct research, hooking people up while they were, navigating websites or shopping in the environment. And this became a new field. So I'm basically credited for starting this field called now neuromarketing.
Right. Yes. And it's been quite an interesting ride and journey, because I know that in addition to seeing you at conferences and having you come into our groups, you also did a series for me where we went through neuroscience and then neuromarketing and neuroselling and neuro negotiating.
That's right.
And it was a tremendous experience. And every now and again, one of my members will say to me, remember that video I made that Christophe told us how to make? And I go, yeah. He goes, I want to update it. I was like, okay, let's see what you got, and I, and I have to go back to the reference material. Obviously, it was tremendous reference material from you, but that was, I would say, and we've had through the years, because this is like 25 years for me now, so several hundred speakers. You are one of the most impactful we've ever had, top 3, I would say, because people just don't understand. And, well, why did they decide that over this? And why did they choose this over that? And just the fact that you can help your audience and your clients understand what makes them the choice is, I think, an overwhelming advantage. So I want to thank you for that. So I know, and you were one of the first, I believe, to actually be able to track like eye movements and like time at a page on a website and etc., to give feedback as to what's working, what's not working to your clients and whatnot. But today, and obviously your book on AI, everybody seems to be getting into AI, even those that are just dipping a toe into the water, and there's a lot of apprehension about it. But is that the biggest challenge to business owners, or do you see something else?
So for me, AI is not, first of all, that new, because in neuroscience, unlike traditional marketing where you just ask people yes or no question, in neuroscience, you're measuring brain activity. And that measurement is very noisy. So you're taking 300, 500 points per second. And you have to load up all that data, which is impossible to crunch without AI. So I've been using AI models for 15 years. What I was able to do is take this new form of AI, which is primarily generative AI. And generative AI, unlike the old AI, can go beyond just crunching data. It can actually formulate and start predicting and even generating copy and generating images based on certain recommendation that you put in the model. So to me, this was like this major gift I had been really dreaming about, of automating a lot of what I was doing for my client I can now train an AI to do it. I've basically learned to clone myself. And what I will talk about tomorrow is how every single company on this planet now, whether you're a $2 million company or a $55 billion company, my newest client is AstraZeneca, I still enjoy helping the people who are sweating at the front line with technology that I believe they can afford now. There's a lot of misuse. There's a lot of hype. There's a lot of disappointment when you don't have the guidance that I will provide tomorrow. And that guidance, believe it or not, comes from neuroscience. Why? Because while you still see people engaging in messaging that include text and a lot of heavy explanation, our brain is so fried with the volume of information we receive every single day that we have literally zero capacity any longer to read, to reflect, particularly on messages that are trying to sell you anything. But we do have, at a very primal level, capacity to engage visually, which is always our most default mode of interaction. Why? Because that's what gets us in trouble. If we see a stick that looks like a snake, we don't have to actually identify it as a snake. We're going to move away in 50 milliseconds, right?
Yep.
So our visual engagement is essential. And people in marketing have often failed in creating visuals or videos that tell an entire story in just a few seconds. Why insist that people should read and understand and compute when in fact we know it does not work? So I'm training companies, as I told you, that could be just a few $1 million in revenue or multi-billion, to understand the necessity of being visual, of using emotions as the chemicals they are, that will nudge us in a direction. When we like something, when we feel trust, we move to decision. When we feel distrust, we don't. So it's not about logic. A lot of these emotions that we feel are triggered below our level of consciousness, right? So all that language of visual, of emotion, is the language that now I can train an AI to understand. And what I will share tomorrow is this technique. You're probably familiar with this language that I already described, and how you engage with AI is called prompting. Yep. And prompting is basically a modified form of English, right? I teach prompting for Johns Hopkins. I teach agentic AI and so on. But I came up with this concept of neuroprompting. So tomorrow people will understand that whatever instructions you're giving to an AI creates the boundaries of how that AI is going to answer. And if you don't have good prompts, if they're just too generic, too general, you're going to fail. Most people don't understand that the way these models have been created, this is called large language models, they've been scrubbing mostly the internet for 10, 15 years worth of data. And in my field, for instance, in marketing, everybody has an opinion on how marketing should be run in a company, right? Some are legitimate in my view, because I'm a scientist. I kind of have a preference for some people that have done a little bit of homework, right? And some people say, well, screw that. I've been a successful CEO. I've been so good that I can tell you in my book how to do it, right? So you have very sort of intuitive, anecdotal, sources. And then you have some books that never get read because they're too academic, right? But if you ask AI, it's going to average all these things together. To do what? To give you some sort of modeled version, model meaning like diluted version of what you should do. There's no real theory guiding the AI. I believe in theory. I've built a theory on persuasion. So I want the AI power to use my theory. And that's what I'm going to teach people to do tomorrow.
Well, I'm very enlightened here. I'm really looking forward to tomorrow. When Christophe refers to tomorrow, he's talking about our annual Business and Economic Summit, which we do once a year. And we bring in the top of the top in terms of speakers to be our keynotes. So you've not only been a trailblazer in neuroscience, but you've now been a trailblazer in AI, because I don't know anyone who's been using AI for 15 years, maybe 5, and because I remember the first time we brought someone in to talk to our groups about AI was probably like February after ChatGPT had been released. So that's got to be like 2023 it was released in 2022.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's absolutely amazing. And your reference to what we see, the images versus all the verbiage and all the text. In your seminars and your presentations, the 3 most vivid I can remember. One was a beer commercial. One was a car commercial with Darth Vader, so to speak.
Yes, that's right.
And the other one was a commercial for children's mattresses.
Yeah.
And they're all entertaining.
Yeah.
And minimal. I think the one, there was no words whatsoever.
Yeah.
And in the other one, all you heard was the jumping up and down of the child on the bed. There was absolutely no words spoken, but they were very powerful and very impactful. So first of all, thank you for that. And thank you for educating our audience as to that, because I still have members of this day that come to me and say, what are those 7 words that you're supposed to use all the time? They get people's attention. So in addition to prompting, though, and I guess we'll call it neuroprompting, what is the biggest challenge that you see to get more and more people to use AI responsibly?
Well, that's an excellent question and a big issue around AI. And a lot of it is because people do not always know what options they can choose as they create their settings. For instance, it's a little bit like what happened with social media. As you recall, Facebook was not exactly that explicit about what it is that they were doing with their data. Facebook is a former client of mine.
Okay.
So I know the culture, and I will, at this point, like to believe that it was more because of naivete than, evil intent. And then they taught people, wait a second, make sure you turn this on so that some of your data is not available. Well, we have the same problem in AI today. A lot of people, I think, are very naive and do not understand that many aspects of these large language model is to train on your data, is to train on your content. And so whatever conversation you're having is not private. And it could be about, health issues that you have. It could be that you're engaging in, things that you're not supposed to. And I just feel like people need a serious wake-up call in terms of fully understanding what it means to be protected from your interactions. Tomorrow, the idea that I'm going to share is that people start creating their own custom AI, and OpenAI, not commissioned, or has a product called Custom GPT, which is $24 a month. And for that price, you can create your own private AI. And that means the correspondence, the files that you start uploading could be completely private. That's why I do it for people who want their own branding, standards loaded into that, their own best messages, because they don't want that to be, shared with their competition. So there's a lot of that aspect, just making sure that you understand and protect your knowledge, number one. Number two, there are all kinds of issues that we know are serious and should be addressed. For instance, biases. If you're creating, and using AI for HR purposes, and you're asking AI to help you filter and sort out some resumes, well, we know AI was given data sets of historical, choices that companies have made for the last 40 years. And there are much more, white male executives, top executives than female of color, right? And so you have the ability, if you understand, to create a set of instructions inside an AI, and it's just in plain English, that say, hey, if you're going to advise me in recruiting be aware that I do not want, that there's these biases that you may have in your data set to affect your recommendations. You can also control for the use of certain language. Of course, profanity and sexual content is typically filtered at the corporate level, but there are all kinds of products in AI that have zero filter, particularly those coming out of China.
Oh, yes. There's a lot to be aware of. And that's custom GPT.
Yeah, custom GPT. So we'll talk about that
And
tomorrow.
I actually have a true life story that I know about. Someone close to me works for one of the top investment banks in the country. And they undertook a project to use AI to modify their hiring practices because they were getting an abundance of candidates from top schools, and they were of one sort of background and one sort of race, etc.
Yeah.
And what they discovered is that they developed a very effective AI program that did exactly the same thing because they didn't clean out the biases. And,
That's right.
and it totally, destroyed all the time, energy, and effort that they put in to this program because they got the same results they had always gotten when they were looking to get more diversity.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that is very interesting, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions about that. When you're working with your clients or even your students, etc., what's been the biggest hurdle you've seen and you've had to overcome?
So with my journey has always been about fighting the resistance within of companies that either are holding on to marketing approaches that are mostly run by agencies that are not typically that interested in science, to be perfectly honest. They like the old boy, madman kind of approach to advertising. It's
one of my favorite shows.
It is. And frankly, you can watch it today. And I promise you, because I've had some pretty impressive clients that sort of pulled me into, sessions with these agencies. And they're like so threatened by me when in fact I'm coming in peace to share 20 years worth of research that I've done on the brain that can explain scientifically whether that campaign is going to be a dud and you've just wasted $60 million for it, or if you really want to do something that's going to move the needle. So there's so much waste that sometimes it's a big issue of resistance. Now with AI, it's not so much marketers from within that are fighting me or fighting what I do. It's IT. Why? Because they're afraid of what can happen. And at many levels, I understand the fear of compromising the integrity and the security of critical documents. So when I engage with very large clients like AstraZeneca, particularly because they're based in Europe, they have a very, very rigorous, as they should, way of vetting me and vetting the kind of technology that I'm going to be using. And they're also involving IT to make sure that there are no documents that are floating around and so on. So the IT people can be either helpful in the integration of AI or a fierce opposition. And a lot of that usually is because of ignorance, because they haven't been properly trained. And so if you have an organization that depends on IT, boy, please take the training seriously and put them through and make them allies, not forces of resistance.
Right. I'm going to give you a little bit of credit here because until you started making presentations to my groups, I would say all of our members who were marketing people thought that they were creatives, artistic, and marketing was an art. And through your research and your writings, you've absolutely proven that no, there's a science in this. So it's partly art, but it's also
both.
science.
Absolutely.
And I've seen the progression where they have fully adapted to this belief of, what does the brain do? How's the brain going to react? How does it impact our emotions? Because at the end of the day, we're emotional beings.
Exactly.
So it's very, very interesting. I'd like to turn the table a little bit, if you will, because I know you've written 3 books on mental health, and I know it's a topic that is very near and dear to your heart. the special needs community, et cetera, et cetera. So please educate us
Yeah.
on this.
So neuroscience was, for me, an opportunity to, in a way, revolutionize a lot of marketing practices. But I also, when I pursued my PhD, was determined to have a much better understanding of mental health. And a lot of it is simply because my son has Tourette syndrome, and he was diagnosed when he was 6. And I was going from one psychiatrist to another and never could figure out the path of the disease, which is very complicated, particularly through the teenage years, and figured I might as well just develop my own knowledge of what is, in fact, the neuroscience behind the disease, and how can I share that with my own son in a way that is constructive to his, healing and ability to accept the disorder. It's one of those disorder that really doesn't go away, and so you really have no other option but integrate it and accept it.
Mm-hmm.
And that
it is very much misunderstood.
Totally, it's very poorly understood, and it's poorly treated as well. So
kind of goes hand in hand.
Yeah, that journey became also very personal because during COVID, I was grounded like a pilot. I could not fly every week as much as I had done for 20 years. And it pretty much put me into a pretty surprising depression. And I felt like if I have done all this work on learning about the brain and some of those conditions that my son was struggling with, why don't I take the time? Somebody, whether it's the divine or something else, gave me that opportunity to stop. And I felt this was the perfect time to really put my research on the neuroscience of mental health. And I was specifically really interested in understanding neuroplasticity. Now, neuroplasticity is well known, documented in the repair of organs. When we cut our finger, it's gonna come back and heal itself, right? If you break a bone, it's going to be most likely repairing it itself. But we rarely understand that our brain has also the capacity to rewire our personal stories. And a lot of mental disorders, whether they are taking the form of high anxiety, high stress, depression, addiction, and trauma, which are the 5 that I decided to focus on. Why? Because nearly 50% of the American population is affected by one of those 5 at toxic level. So this is a massive problem of society where people are, either numbing themselves through those conditions, often through abusing alcohol or drugs and so on. So I wanted to crack the code of what it takes to bring more awareness, raise the awareness of people who are in those conditions, because unfortunately when you're depressed, you lack perspective. You tend to kind of lock yourself into this little box, and you're not as open to suggestions and to healing and so on. So I really was interested in understanding, what does it mean to make people more aware and conscious? What does it mean to accelerate neuroplasticity, which is essentially how do you motivate people to engage in practices that help them rewire their story? So a lot of storytelling, a lot of treatments that I became very interested in. For instance, AA. AA has at its center the practice of storytelling. And I had never written a book or even read a book that started to look at, why does telling your personal story to a group of people who are, let's say alcoholics, why does it work? What does it do in the brain when you do that? Mm-hmm. So my first book was to investigate the way I've investigated the effect of advertising on the brain. I wanted to understand the direct effect of these stories inside the brain of people who receive them and the people who are sick. And so Serenity Code became my first book in that sort of domain. And most recently, earlier last year, I published a book called Open, which is a very personal book, yet again, being very transparent about my own struggle, but is digging even further on neuroplasticity and the power of rituals. I was a very late bloomer, if you will, in the spiritual world. I refused to accept that spirituality even existed. But once I started to practice specific rituals, for instance, meditating or praying or being mindful when I'm in nature, all these things before I became interested in, I thought was just, little off the top and not really within those kinds of practices that I thought were, scientific. Mm. And all of a sudden, once I started to open myself to many of those rituals, and in Open, I identified 26 of them, I started to heal at incredible speed. And not only did I start to heal, but my son started to heal because I was asking him to follow the same path. So I write book typically for me. In this day and age, to be honest, very few people even read at all. Mm-hmm. And I've learned that if I'm interested in something, if I'm passionate about something like AI, I have really two options that I love. One is to create courses, which I've done 7 for Johns Hopkins, and they don't even understand how I can do that. They keep giving me courses and give me the freedom to create them. And I love it.
Well, thank God for that.
And then books are the same. It's like, for me, it's like I feel I really get something once I've applied the work and the homework it takes to write or to create a course about it.
Well, it's sort of like getting back to something you said. You're telling a story.
Yeah, that's right.
And you're getting juiced.
Yeah.
By telling that story. Now, you said something which I got to go back to, which is to me shocking. 50% of the population in the U.S. suffer from one of 5 major mental
stress,
issues.
Toxic stress. We're talking people who are basically a big bath of cortisol, right? Okay. Which leads to heart attacks and all kinds of other things like that.
I am convinced that because they can't find anything, my stroke was related to stress.
To stress, yeah. I'm sure a big chunk of the... Right. Yeah. To anxiety, which is a very nasty disorder because it's basically when your mind is ruminating and cycling through and making all kinds of crazy predictions and so on. It's exhausting. It's very difficult to get rid of it. I got rid of all mine through those rituals. Depression, which often is a byproduct of either stress and anxiety. Addiction, which we know is rampant, and a lot of it is, again, people frankly numbing pain they can't address in any other way, and of course trauma. Because I was a bit naive about this particular topic, but my wife, who's also psychology, taught me that we all have trauma. And it's not just an accident, or it's not just because you've been, the victim of a particular crime or aggression and so on. And I'm not diminishing any of that. Right. I'm saying that people have this idea that trauma is just limited to, veterans. Right. No. Through therapy, which I did in my late 50s, I discovered that there were moments in my life where I packed a lot of stress and anxiety at an age where what was happening, I couldn't process. Right. It could be, and it was as much the death of my cousin at the time, who I absolutely adored, and he just disappeared because he was killed in an accident. Or my dad being in coma for 3 months from a terrible accident, and his volatility after that, because at the time, these events were not healing very well.
And I'm sure there's a lot of suppressed trauma.
Exactly. Yeah.
But now, is that the same in other countries? And I'm not talking about, I'm talking, I guess, mainly Europe, South America, maybe some Asian countries, the not second and third world countries, but is that the same in other developed countries?
So I don't have the exact data for those 5, but I can tell you that it's within 4 or 5 points. it's international. And of course, I pay attention to the French numbers, and they are worse than the US.
Really?
Yeah, particularly, and this is the most troubling and most, the most concerning aspect of all this data, is the youth is at massive risk on all those five.
Yes, no, I can definitely see that.
Yeah.
And and the reason I'm glad you mentioned this to me about Tourette's is there's a reality show on TV.
Yeah.
And you lived the reality.
Yeah.
It wasn't a TV show.
No.
It was everyday life for you.
Yeah.
And so I'm not, and I don't know anyone directly who has that affliction, but on behalf of everyone who suffers from that, thank you for digging deep and writing that book and for diagnosing these 5 toxic things that we all do from time to time. Which one of your books had the greatest impact, do you think, on you and then on society?
Well, I would say if you measure impact by the success and the distribution, Persuasion Code is by far the most successful book I have ever published, and I do think the message is a very powerful one from a business perspective. From a spiritual and what I call neurospiritual now, which is really understanding many of those conditions, not just from a clinical standpoint. And I'm not really the kind of guy who's saying, don't see a psychiatrist or don't see a doctor. But I truly believe that once we have a better understanding of our brain, that neuro component, and we engage in practices which often have been performed by all kinds of communities around the world for thousands of years, we have way more power to heal than we believe. I think our societies have often decided we want to outsource our health, right? Yep. And that didn't work for my son. And it really wasn't my preference to go and hit every doctor I could. I wrote a book, Open, which has basically the formula for many people who are tired of being depressed. And, a lot of people do not respond very well to meds. Of course, there's this emerging, very exciting to me, field of psychedelic assisted therapy. So the US is really at the forefront, like Canada and other countries, in a movement very much like with the cannabis, which is to legalize these substances that we know can accelerate healing, as long as there is a psychological framework to do it. So it's not about just letting people have an experience, whether it's mushrooms or MDMA. It's to be able to guide that experience. What does that experience mean to your healing? So we're having to rethink what was, substances that have been used mostly recreational. And it's very strange, because when you start looking at plant medicine in all countries, most, for instance, South America, they've been using these medicines purely for healing, not recreationally. But in the US, our struggle, a little bit with alcohol, same thing. Our struggle has been to feel that these substances are, used for fun. And I'm not making judgment. I'm just saying it has not allowed.
Well, I think you're spot on.
The message on the healing property, which is real. I mean, it's not a political issue. It's a completely bipartisan issue.
I mean, all you have to do is look back in history. We outlawed alcohol.
Yeah.
And it became like the number one recreation.
Yeah.
Oh, for the longest time, marijuana and cannabis products were not legal. And it was all recreational use. Maybe a little bit in the last 15 years. Okay, it can help me with my glaucoma, or it can help me with this or that. But it had to be prescribed.
That's right.
And it was in very rare instances. So, and look, I have many clients that, whether it's mushrooms or gummies or cannabis or just marijuana, cigarettes or whatever, it helps them.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of stress in running a business and so on and so forth. So a final question. When we're back here doing another podcast 5, 10, and 15 years from now, What do you see that has happened beyond AI that is going to have the greatest impact for business, personal, wherever you want to take it?
Well, as you know, I live in Hawaii.
Yes, great place to retire to.
My wife and I have created a retreat center, and we can help people heal also in what we believe is a very sacred space. And so I think our world is becoming so fast and furious. Nobody can keep up with the rate of change in AI. I mean, you're almost barely understanding one model, and it's just basically obsolete. So we're going to have to learn very, very fast. It's not about necessarily trying everything, but learning is at the center, and your company is doing that. It's training, for the most part, people to learn and adapt. So this is going to be absolutely central to the survival. And be curious without being reckless. In other words, there are all kinds of products that are half-baked, particularly in AI, but they are paradigm shifters. And so if you begin early on in kind of doing this in a testing, attitude, but not engage the entire business, like create a custom GPT, and be playful with it, but do it safely. And then, like you prototype and then you move and apply.
Test, apply.
Apply, and apply. But there are opportunities, and this is very exciting to me, for companies, particularly small companies, to have the same cutting edge that these large companies are getting, and maybe even faster, because they don't have the same protocols and filters and so on. So I think there's going to be a lot of companies or people that can't keep up, and a lot of those jobs that we're told are going to be replaced might eventually, a lot of task-centric jobs, but nothing is going to replace our ability to ask the right question. Nothing is going to be replacing the energy of humans to lead other humans. Nothing is going to replace the bliss of being in nature, like this island we're in. And so I want to see our ability as humans to pay more attention to that.
Is there a website? Give yourself a plug for the retreats.
So the center is called Manta Soul, in one word. Are you familiar with manta rays? Have you heard of manta rays?
Yeah, manta rays, sure. I've seen them in aquariums and whatnot.
That's right. So manta rays are these magnificent creatures that can be of 12 feet, wide. And there's these opportunities in Kona, on the Big Island where I live, to swim with manta rays. And they are just absolutely extraordinary. They have no teeth, and it's just beautiful. So we are divers, my wife and I. Of course, as psychologists, we want to go deep. And so manta rays can go up to 1,000 feet without breathing, which is, nobody can understand why. So we named our center Manta Soul, because a lot of the work we do is about helping people find their soul. And what does that mean? The soul purpose, the soul language that you can engage in, which is beyond just being a primal brain and a rational brain. We're all souls. And so we do a lot of work around that. So Manta Soul is the name of our retreat.
.com or .org?
.com.
Yeah, .com. Yeah. And also I would encourage our audience to look up Dr. Christophe Morin. And
so the book is explained and on our regular website, SalesBrain.com.
Right.
SalesBrain.com.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Christophe, it's been excellent. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
And for our viewing audience, tune in next time when we'll have another great, compelling conversation with another great, compelling guest. Thank you for joining us.